Okay, so if you take a look up here now, I'm going to talk you through cascading style sheets. So what we've seen so far has been HTML. And you might recall at the start of this module I said to you we're going to look at three different things: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we're going to continue looking at HTML. I'm going to give you, well, we won't see much more new HTML after tables. We're going to see a lot more CSS from today. This here is a picture of the first web server. You might recall I was telling you that it came, the first web server, the web began at a place called CERN, a place where they did a lot of physics research, particle physics specifically. And there was a guy there. His problem was there was a lot of scientific information that needed to be disseminated, and he came up with this improvement on what we had already. And if you were to look at the first web pages, first of all, you'd have found them particularly dull in terms of their layout. We had tags like a H1, which is a number one heading. A H2 is the next sized heading down. A H3 is smaller than that. And an important point about those headings was that they did more than specify the look of the page. When you're dealing with a H1 and a H2 and a H3, you're also getting a sense from those tags of the relationships between the content. And that was important. Over time then, people with ponytails became involved in web design, web development, and we started to get more glamorous and more exciting and more sexy web pages. So we had extensions to HTML like font tags, where you could change the appearance of the font. You could set background colors. You could do all sorts of things. And unfortunately, if you were to look at the HTML of a web page, it was very hard to separate out the content from the form. So you had all this information about, put this here in pink, put this in blue, put this over here, underline this. And it became very hard to actually read a HTML document. So there was a decade of madness there, really, where we ran away with ourselves altogether. And there's some sanity coming back to the development process now. And now we separate out the content and the super cool mad design man. So some of you might have noticed a few times my taking a pen and scribbling out your bold tag and saying, no, we don't put a bold in there, we'd never do that. With your HTML, you focus on describing the structure of the content of your web page. So it's all about the content and the structure in the HTML. When it comes then to making it look pretty, and we do want to make it look pretty, we do all the pretty stuff somewhere else. We don't put it in the HTML document. We put that in the cascading style sheet. And usually the style sheet is actually a completely separate document even. And so we separate out the content of the page from the style of the page. So for your tables there, you're describing the structure of the table. If you want the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to be in pink, you don't put that in the HTML document. You put that stuff to do with pink in this CSS file, we call it. Okay? So, style sheets can be embedded in a page. So you could at the top of the page say, this is the styling information about this page. But actually, usually what we do is we put the style in a separate file. So the style sheet is a separate file altogether. And then that allows several pages to all reference the same style sheet. And so if you decide that you're going to change your color scheme, let's say in the run-up to Christmas, you're going to make your website look all Christmassy, and you change your backgrounds from white to Christmassy red, you could just change that one style sheet and all of the pages that use that style sheet would all change. So it allows you to change the style of all of the pages on your site very quickly, and it also allows you to have consistent styling across all of the pages. So to reference a style sheet, up in the header of your document, you'd say link rel equals style sheet, href equals, and you'd give the path of the file name. Typically it'll be in the same folder. That's always a .css file. And you say type equals text/CSS. And so what that says to the browser is, okay, here's the HTML for this web page, but the styling information, the information about what colors, what fonts to use, that's all in this other file called alpha.css. So the styling information is contained in a separate file, and you link to that file from the HTML using code like this. I'll come back to that. I'll put it somewhere you like. So the same HTML file can look very, very differently depending on the style sheet that's used. So here, the same HTML is used in each page, but the styling information given to the browser about how to style the content is different. So in each case, the content is the same. The HTML file is the same, but the styling is different. Now you can style in three different ways. You can have an inline style, an embedded style, and a linked style. For this module, you're only going to use linked styles, but you should know about the others. So you can put a style inside in a tag. So here we have a div tag. A div just stands for division. It's just a section of the HTML document. It doesn't do anything in particular by itself, but it's a handy thing to use when you're doing CSS. Here we're saying that if you, this particular div has this particular styling information. So this section of the page is going to look like this. Now, they can be useful in exceptional circumstances, but generally they're a bad idea. Because if you have all these inline styles all over your document, you're not going to be a whole lot better off than if you were just doing the things the old-fashioned way with, coding stuff all over the shop. So you won't be using any inline styles. If I see an inline style in some of the work you hand up, you'll have to have a very, very, very good explanation as to why it was absolutely necessary to use an inline style in that particular instance. But it can be done. You can also put the style information, the style sheet, at the top of the page. But that style sheet will only apply to that page. Now that can be useful when you're developing a page, when you're developing the style and you're working on it and you're building it up, and then maybe you could copy and paste that out into an external style sheet that could be used by other pages. So an embedded style might be useful when you're just developing the website. But again, you shouldn't be using any embedded styles in the work you hand up, unless it's just one page. If it's one page, then it makes sense to have an embedded style in that one page. But if you have many pages, it doesn't make sense. And then here we're back to linked style, which was the kind I showed you already. So we have in the header, we say link href equals the name of the style sheet, and then we say rel equals style sheet, type equals text/css.
Is that not the other way around? Is that not the other way around?
I could have put rel first and then href and then type. It doesn't matter. So when you have a link like that, when you have a tag, you can have the attributes in any order. So in your image tag, for example, you have width and height and alt, but you could say alt and width and height, or you could say width, alt, height. It doesn't matter in the order. So you might have one style sheet then for all of the pages on your website, and so they will all then look roughly the same. And if you change your mind, if you say, actually I don't like that shade of pink after all, I'm going to go for a wine color or something, you can change the style sheet, and all of the pages that use that style sheet will change, all of them. Now, there's a precedence, okay? This is where the cascade in cascading style sheet comes from. Let's say you have an inline style that says a piece of text should be blue. You have an embedded style that says it should be green. You have a linked style that says it should be orange. You have a user style sheet, which I'll explain in a second, which might say you want it in black, and your default style sheet might be saying it should be in white and underlined, right? So let's say the same piece of text is trying to be styled 5 different ways. Well, the inline style would win out in that case, because it's the most specific. And the embedded style will always override the linked style. And the linked style overrides the user style sheet or the default style sheet. Every browser has a default style sheet that says, for example, links should be underlined. That says if you have a list, a nested list, it should be indented by so much, that you should have bullet points or whatever. Different browsers may then use they may have different default style sheets, which is the reason things might look different in different browsers. So if you have no style sheet, then the default style sheet will be used. In the past, many people may have had a user style sheet. So I might have decided that because I don't see very well or something, instead of having my text black on white, I would like to have it white on black. And so I might have had my user style sheet that said, despite what the browser thinks, this is the way I like my stuff to look. However, any linked style sheet would override that user style sheet. Although there is actually a way, if I really, really wanted to override the linked style sheet, I could force my user style sheet to override that actually if I wanted. But that's just getting silly now. Okay? So in general, the more specific style information is going to override the general style information. And so if a single piece of content on the page is supposed to be styled a number of different ways, then the more specific will win out. You're not going to see much of this because you shouldn't be having an inline nor an embedded style anyway. So this shouldn't come up for you. No. So let's actually look at what CSS might look like. So in a style sheet, we have a selector and we have a declaration. And so the selector says, this is what I'm talking about. So wherever you have a H1 in the document, I want it to look like this. So you have a selector part where you say what you're talking about, and the declaration part where you say how you want it to look. inside in the declaration part, then you have a list of properties and values. So you specify the property you're talking about and the value you want it to have. And the property you're talking about and the value you want it to have. So this is saying, wherever there's a H1 in this document, I want the color of it to be blue, and I want the font weight of it to be bold. And so in that document then, wherever there's a H1, it'll be styled that way. So if the browser had been inclined to do H1s in black, if you said nothing and the H1s were coming out black, this here is going to override the browser style sheet and make all the H1s blue. I'll talk you through some more here now. Okay? Now, this styling information up top is saying wherever there's a H1, I want the color to be blue. I'll explain in a later class why hash 0000FF turns out to be blue. Does anybody want to hazard a guess, given what we did in the first part of the class? Remember I was talking about the three colors? The red and the green and the blue? They're hexadecimal. As it turns out, it's the RGB value of the color expressed in hexadecimal. So the first two digits there are the redness, that's the greenness, and that's the blueness. But we'll come back to that. Don't worry about that for now. This could just as easily say blue. Okay? So we're saying here that wherever you have a H1, the color is going to be blue. And then here we're specifying the font family. Now, there's a problem, there's an issue with fonts, okay? And people get carried away. Just because, like, you can only ever display in the browser can only ever use fonts that it has. Now, the fonts are on the user's operating system. So, just because you have super cool font number 172 installed on your machine doesn't mean that someone living in Tibet also has super cool font number 172 on their machine. So what you need to do is you specify the font that you would like first. So in this case, I've specified that I would like the H1s to be in Helvetica. If, however, Helvetica isn't available to the browser on the machine that it's displaying, then I'd like it to be in Impact. So it's a bit like when you go to vote in Ireland, you specify the candidates in order of preference. So you list your number 1 choice for font first, then your number 2 choice, then your number 3, then your number 4, and then your number 5. At the very, very end, then, you must also, and this is a must, you must specify a generic font family. And every browser will have a representative font for that family. So if there isn't Helvetica and there isn't an Impact, then it'll do it in the sans serif font de jour, whatever it happens to be, whatever its sans serif representative is. And there are actually 5 generic font collections, okay? The serif, sans serif, monospace, fantasy, and cursive. Just to explain the difference between serif and sans serif, do you see the little foot there on the end of that F? See the way some letters have little embellishments, like this F here has a little foot, this S here has a little line. That's the serif, or serif, depending on how you want to pronounce it. A sans serif font, for those of you that did French in school, is one without the serif. So you can see this letter here doesn't have any of those embellishments. So typographers and graphic designers, when they're thinking about fonts, the first thing they think about is, do I want a serif or sans serif font? That's the first thing they ask themselves. Serif fonts are considered to be easier to read. Maybe you'd use them for the body of the text. Sans serif fonts are considered harder maybe to read in the body of the text, but they're good for headlines. But really the jury is out on what's better and what's more readable. Certainly serif fonts are more traditional. The most popular serif font is Times, named for the London Times newspaper that popularized it. And if you take a newspaper like The Guardian that wanted to sort of break with tradition, the first thing they did was went for a big feck-off sans serif typeface. So if you pick up a copy of The Guardian, you'll notice sans serif type everywhere, or all over the place. So they wanted to be not the Times. First thing they did was go for that typographic choice. Monospace, a monospace font uses the same amount of width for each letter. So in a monospace font, M takes up the same space as L. For computer code, we often like to use monospace, so because things line up more easily for us. Cursive is meant to look like handwriting. And Fantasy isn't very well supported by browsers. That's, file under, freaky goth, whatever. Okay? It may have some, representative of that. So whatever font you do specify, you can specify your preferred font, whatever one it happens to be. You can give a shopping list of them, as many as you like, but you must end your shopping list with one of these generic font families. Now, the problem I described where you can't use a font unless it's installed on the machine, Google has tackled that problem with a Google Fonts project. And what that allows you to do is Google will give you a bit of code. You specify what fonts you want to use. Google will give you a bit of code. You can plug that into your HTML document, and then it'll cause the browser to download the things in advance. So you can have a look into that. But that's not a CSS thing, really. That's another day's work. Great. Okay, I'm going to skip through some of these so I don't do as much shouting. There's a whole bunch of properties, and you wouldn't be expected to know them all. So the font style property, for example, tells you whether something is in italic or not. It can be normal, it can be in italics, or it can be oblique. For most of us, oblique and italics are actually the same thing. But a graphic designer will tell you, or a typographer will tell you, no, they're different. I think the difference is italics, you have normal text, and oblique makes the text slanty, and I think italics is actually slanty with some embellishments. But to be honest, to me they look the same. And in fact, most browsers would probably, if you ask for oblique, would just give you the italic. But if you're a typographer, you probably, have a tizzy fit or something and start, fiddling with your ponytail. Now, the font weight property, tells you how bold something is. And you can, for example, specify normal, bold, bolder or lighter, or you can even give it a number. Now, the structure of CSS and the specification for it is fairly future-proofed, you know, and in some respects, some of the things the system can do aren't fully implemented by the browsers. Now, you can, in theory, say, I want this to be like, have a boldness of 200, and this other text have a boldness of 250, and the 250 should appear bolder than the 200. But for the most part, browsers typically don't support that very well. A nice one, for example, is normal and small caps. So if you set the font variant property to small caps, then all of the letters will appear all in capitals. Even though in the HTML document they're actually uppercase and lowercase, you see them as caps in the browser. I'll fly through. Oh yeah, this is an important point here now as well, okay? There is a shorthand you can use where you can just say font and then specify a whole bunch of properties. So you don't have to do, for example, say font variant small caps. You can just say font oblique small caps 8-point Arial sans serif, for example. So, but there are some rules, okay? So if you're using the font shorthand, you must specify a font size and a font family. But you'd specify font weight, font style, font variant first in any order you want. And then you must specify the font size and then the font family at the end. But if you have a whole bunch of font properties you want to set, you can do them all in one go there, like that. Here's a bunch of them you can look up and just see what different kind of things they do. Letter spacing changes the space between the letters, for example. Word spacing changes the space between the words. And that's enough now of that for today. What I want to show you now is I want to show you the table that I made earlier. So this is my table, and I'm going to show you here. I've specified that I wanted to use this style sheet. And if we look at the style sheet, I've said wherever you have a table, I want the border of the table to be 5 pixels thick. I want it to be a solid line, and I want it to be this color. If I change the style sheet to 25, change this to 25 and refresh, we'll see a difference. Now, I haven't changed the HTML file at all. I've just changed the style sheet. We go back to 5. I think you can say double, can I? See there, I've changed the style of the border from solid to double. So I'm changing the border properties of this table. You notice here, my caption has gone at the bottom. There's a caption there in the table. I can set where that appears in relation to the table. I can say top, I think. And now the caption appears up there. I'll push the boat out, see if I can say right, see what happens. That's not good, but it's on the right. So you can modify the properties of the table by changing the contents of the style sheet. No. So just to recap now, this is saying wherever you have a table, I want this property to have these values. There's clearly a shorthand going on here for the border. I'll show you what the empty cells does in a second. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some more CSS to this style sheet. Here I'm saying wherever you have a caption tag, I want the background to be this color and the text to be this color. So we should see the appearance of the caption change now. Now, once again, it's important to realize that I have not touched the HTML file. There's nothing in the HTML file about the color. All the HTML file says is that the styling information for this page is in that CSS file there. And I'm modifying the CSS file, I'm modifying the style sheet, and that's changing the appearance of the page. But I haven't touched the HTML document. All the HTML document says is, this is a table, this is the caption, here's the first row, here are the TDs in there, here's the next row, here are the TDs and THs in there. Now, it starts to get interesting because we have THs and TDs in our table. So what I'm going to say now is, wherever I have a TH, we're going to set these properties. So this is saying wherever there's a TH, I want the background to be this, the text to be this, I want it to have this border, the font variant is going to be small caps, padding is going to put some space in there, and it's going to be Courier is my preferred font. But if I can't have Courier, I'll have whatever your monospace, whatever your representative of the monospace family is. So we modify the style sheet, refresh the page, and see what happens there. This is what I meant by small caps. I haven't used an uppercase E. I had uppercase W and then lowercase E, D, N, E, S, W, A, Y. Small caps puts those in capital letters. So because we've coded the table with both TH and TD tags, we can make the headers look radically different from the regular bits of data. And so for my last trick, I'm going to style all the TDs. So this is saying wherever you have a TD tag, I want the background to be whatever, the color to be whatever, the border to be this, I want some padding, and I want my preferred font family is Florence. But if I can't have that, I'll take whatever your representative of the cursive family is. And now we have a very pretty table. Okay? And once again, I just want to stress, I haven't gone near the HTML file. All I've done is modified the style sheet that the HTML file refers to. Now I get to show you what the empty cells does. If I take that out there. So you can see some of you were wondering, should you put something into the empty cell to make it look okay? Because it didn't look quite right if there was nothing in it. You can actually decide what you want to do with the empty cells. Do you want to show them, as in here, or do you want to hide them? It's a property of the table. Watch now. I think it looks better hidden. So those are cells with nothing in them. They don't show up at all. So any questions on that? That's quite a lot to take in now. But the really, really important point with CSS is that the content and the structure of the content goes into the HTML file, and then all the information about how it's going to look, the colors and the fonts and the spacing and the indenting, all of that goes into the style sheet. And so we separate out the style from the content. So we have our form in one place and our function in the other. That's a really, really important, almost ideological stance to take when you're coding your HTML. And that's one of the big differences between the professionals and the guys, in their bedroom doing it for, 50, 60 quid. Okay? But you're not trading to be amateurs. You're the people that are going to do it right. And this is the way we do it. We separate out the content and the style, and we don't mix them. So when you read the HTML file, you should be able to read through that very, very easily and see what the content is. Any questions? Right, so what I'll do is I'll leave this HTML, the CSS file up on the screen, and you can have a poke around, adding in some of the styling information piece by piece and seeing what you can get. And looking up, I want you to look up different properties and things and just see what you can do. To have fun with the colors, you want to look up Google HTML color chart. And you get a list, you might get a color chart with different colors and things. So I expect to see some creativity now in terms of how your tables are going to look. There's really only two ways to code the HTML. I mean, if I was to look at your HTML files, there's really only two ways. You're either putting the days across the top or the hours across the top. And you should all have, you really should have all exactly the same HTML file. But the style sheets can be very, very different. So the first thing you need, though, is you need to include in your HTML file the link to the CSS style sheet. So Cascading Style Sheet, CSS. So you want to say link rel equals style sheet, href equals mystyle1.css, something like that, and then type equals text/CSS. And then you can just style three things then: the table, change the properties of the table, the properties of the th, and the properties of the td. Everybody got that bit? I'll put the rest now up on the screen. I'll just put the caption up at the top. It's the least important. I'll put them up the top out of the way, and I'll show you the other two. And that goes in the header.